Probably get started. So welcome everybody. I'm joining you from Bidjigal up here in the northwest of Sydney, and we're just going to start first of all with a welcome to country. I think Melissa, you're going to get the slideshow going. So if we get that going, start first of all. Yeah, so thank you. Welcome to the Learning in the Time of COVID-19 by the Widening Participation Unit hosting you here. We've got some interesting speakers for you today. I'm not sure we'll take up the whole 2 hours of your time. We'll see how we go. But let's start with the welcome to country. Some problems with it.
Melissa, you just need to
Sorry, I'm just having problems with the audio. I'm just going to try and share it again and see if I can get it up.
Yama Warami Willimbimbi Warami Midiga Warami Daruga Nura Warami Walameta Warami Nura Walametical. We welcome you on behalf of the ancestors, and we acknowledge all of the elders past and present. We acknowledge all Aboriginal nations of Australia. We walk together on this land, and we pay respects to the traditional owners and those who have walked before us. We acknowledge the land's history, yesterday's, today's and tomorrow's. The land speaks of the Darug and their dreaming. We can still feel, hear and see the ancient songlines across this beautiful campus. This land has held many gatherings for centuries, since the Darug's first sunrise some 60,000 years ago. We belong to the land. We are many nations, many people, coming together, looking after this country and respecting each other. We stand here together at Macquarie on sacred ground. As the Wallamai navigate the mangroves and find their pathways, so shall you here at Macquarie. Warami, welcome to Walamata Duju Goryandu.
Well, that was really nice. That makes me feel like I'm back on the campus because of all the times I've heard that here or there on the campus. As I say, I'm up on Bidjigal land in the northwest of Sydney, and I'm sure you're on different areas of the city and the state. So the theme for today is learning in the time of COVID-19. It's obviously been a challenging time for many of us, staff at the university, obviously people in other areas, but I think especially for young people such as our students, it's been a challenging time. A lot of them have been in a new stage of life anyway, and so it's obviously even more challenging for them. I guess our motivation for having this conversation is obviously a lot of it has been it's been isolating for people. For our younger people, it's obviously a time when they're changing their life. There's a lot of time of life changes, making new friends, inventing yourself. And for a lot of the students, this has been a lost opportunity or a chance where they're not able to develop in the same way that they would have otherwise. Many are coping with anxiety in different ways, general anxiety about their health, financial anxiety, other areas like that. Been challenging for the university in terms of being able to deliver the normal learning that we do. But obviously, in some ways, for teachers, they've been able to pick up new skills, new learning modes. So in some ways, it's been quite a development all at once, quite quickly. While they're also coping with anxiety and challenges in their own family life as well. So there's been an opportunity as well for different change, and we'll hear from some 4 people who will talk about how we've been able to develop, they'll be able to do some things to impact on vulnerable people in the community and then individuals and on our students. So first of all, we'll hear Roberta Grimmel from the Smith family. So she will talk about the impact that they've been having in that organisation on vulnerable families and on individuals. Jonathan Nanloy will talk from the City of Ryde, will talk about the impact on the local community around Macquarie. Ben Wilkes will talk about student wellbeing and how the students have Macquarie University have been impacted. But first we'll have Professor Sean Borlian, the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Programs and Pathways, and my boss. And so he's going to talk about Macquarie University's responses to the COVID-19 crisis, just to set the scene for us all. Sean. Oh, and just before Sean starts, I'd like to say, so we'll have questions through the Zoom chat. So if you do want any questions, we'll be monitoring that chat. So do feel free to ask Sean some questions as we go, and also the same for all the other presenters as well. Thanks. Sean.
Thanks, Stuart, and good day, colleagues, and also welcome to the virtual Macquarie for our guests. While it looks like I'm in my office, I'm actually not. I'm actually in Wingecarribee Shire, where the Gundungurra and the Dharawal are the traditional custodians of that land, and I pay my respects to those traditional custodians. Colleagues, wow, when you think back to the last, what we used to call lunch and learn that I was at, we were in a very different world. And certainly a pandemic and obviously the other events going on in the United States that have had, that resonate around the world, have left us wondering about this time and certainly wondering about many things when it comes to education and society more generally. And I acknowledge Professor Dixon is with us today, a historian of American history, and I'm reminded of Abraham Lincoln's pronouncement that America was the last great hope for Earth, and I fear if that's still the case, we're in for a spot of bother. With regard to where we're at Macquarie, again, I acknowledge and welcome Roberta and Jonathan, and there are a number of other visitors joining us. I thought I might just quickly start by mentioning where we are with regard to how we've responded. So apologies to colleagues for whom this is maybe a little bit of boring reconstruction. We had to move very quickly at the beginning of semester one. Again, it's only weeks ago really that we firstly had to move quickly to deal with our Chinese international students who were no longer able to get to us, and then of course by the middle of March we had to move everyone off campus, and we brought forward our summer semester to afford us a couple of weeks to move everything online. We moved 1,372 units of study online in that 2-week period, which is just a phenomenal effort by our colleagues here at Macquarie. About 20% of Macquarie academic staff at that time had never taught online, and others had sort of passing experience. So it just speaks to the enormity of the task and the calibre of our colleagues. So I pay great respect and heed to them for those efforts. Only really a very few number of units we had to essentially suspend because it was just impossible. And so that meant that many colleagues had to find new solutions. For widening participation, it also meant that we had to think about new solutions. And again, much of that meant moving a lot of our support online for our own students and also for our equity groups that we work with outside of Macquarie. And of course, you know, in the school system, of course, schools themselves closed or later adopted policies that did not encourage external visitors. So we played a role there. We've worked very hard, and I acknowledge the support of the WUP team in this space, especially Margaret's role in and Saya's role in dealing with the schools. One of the things we were able to do was to extend our HSC study lab, which is run out of the Faculty of Science, and we were able to extend enrolment in those HSC study labs to all of our partner schools, which we hope has played some part in helping to stabilise the disruption for, especially for senior school students at this time. In terms of what's coming up in second semester, we are staying online, mostly because of the social distancing consequences. Again, our biggest theatre, the Macquarie Theatre, can take 500 students normally. When it's socially distanced, it can take about 100. Also, we've done some work, Stuart and my P&P team did some work last week around our current teaching spaces and social distancing, and we found, starting at the most popular units, which I think is psychology, and working our way through the 1400 units scheduled for semester 2, we got to unit 83, and under social distancing our capacity was maxed. So that's the reason why we're mostly going to stay online. That said, we are bringing back a limited campus-based teaching, especially around practice-based learning, studio, clinical, lab-based learning. So there is a small amount, and we'll start to recompress the campus over the coming semester. With regard to support of our students, the Vice-Chancellor was very clear as we began this journey through this emergency that students had to come first, and the support of our students had to come first, and that for many students, the sudden loss of a part-time job was a major problem, both for domestic and international students. And so we extended a number of existing schemes and created some other schemes of support. I can tell you that to date, the university has awarded either as direct grants or as loans about $5 million to a large number, several thousands of our students who were in difficult circumstances. This, you'll recall, in New South Wales, we did without too much support from state government, at least early on. But that support is only going so far. And so we still have students on who attend our university that are still in difficulty. And we've seen that through the support we get, our students are getting through such basic necessities as being fed. So I acknowledge Red Frog, the Christian charitable organisation that makes visits to campuses and gives food to students. And they've been coming to Macquarie and doing that. I've been told that in any one go, they usually bring about 250 meals. They open up a booking service, and within 60 minutes, that booking service for that visit is full. I also know that Harris Farm has been very generous in supporting our students, and we've also had support through the Red Cross. So we've really been doing some significant support work, thanks again to our external partners as well. With regard to international students, we're also, some of them are just finding it too difficult to stay, and so we're putting in place provisions to assist those students who might want to return home and continue to study online as well. So that's really a little bit of an introduction to where we're at the moment. Stuart, were there any questions that I could follow up with colleagues?
The only one was from, comment was from Fiona Bonham about Study Lab. I'll just put a comment on that there, that there's almost more than 1,700 students have actually made use of that. So I'd really like to say publicly how much we appreciate, how much what WP appreciate what the Faculty of Science and Engineering have done in terms of providing that for students in all our partner high schools. It's been really quite been great, and they've really been appreciated by the students of these high schools in Western Sydney and also regional New South Wales. Yeah,
I guess the other thing to note is our usual funding. So our seed funding of various projects. We'd really just finalised that, and then the closure came, which meant a lot of these projects either had to dramatically rethink what they were going to do, or have essentially gone into a form of hibernation. So we're working with our internal and external partners in that space. Again, what the future holds at a Commonwealth level, I think at this stage hard to say when it comes to the HEP space and what might or might not be allowed. I guess one of my hopes is that our funding will be able to roll over. It usually doesn't, but that hopefully it might be able to roll over into 2021. My fear is they might say, yes, that can happen, but that's your lot for 2021 because we're also dealing with other financial constraints. But again, I think we'll just have to wait and see what happens in that space. But certainly at this stage, our ambition is to continue to facilitate all the work we do, especially with our partners, and try and get the ship back on course, as it were. So thanks again, everyone. Were there any other questions, Stuart?
No, nothing.
So thanks again to Roberta and Jonathan. I really look forward to, I'm sure colleagues will find great wisdom, and it'd be great to hear about your perspectives as you deal with your unique situations during this emergency. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Sean. Look, just a couple of questions, Sean, around recruitment for 2021 and whether we'd still carry on with sort of normal recruitment, and whether the stresses for year 12 students that have gone through this year, whether they would actually be taken into account for entry for next year.
Sure. And can I also offer my thanks to Roberta again as well? Thank you. Yes, so you will recall in the early weeks of lockdown, there was a bit of a public debate around the disruptions to this year's HSC graduating class. And the Australian National University took some inside running on talking about using Year 11 results this year to make offers. Again, many of you will already know that we've actually been doing that for about 5 years, looking at Year 11 results through our Leaders and Achievers, and also through the Schools Recommendation Scheme, which is that broader UAC entrance pathway. So what we essentially did was we were fairly confident that our current pathways were fit for purpose in the middle of this crisis, and it was more about our future students team just reminding careers advisors, and so I've been doing some work with them, just reminding careers advisors of our abilities in that space. So we are going to be making early offers based on Year 11 results in August. The Schools Recommendation Scheme, we're not doing it through that because it is run by UAC, and they offer their results after students have sat their exams. But we will be using Leaders and Achievers, and you know, we've made some tinkering there with regard to obviously some of the criteria that we might judge on. Obviously, for some students, their community engagement has either hibernated or looks very different. So we'll be looking at that. Schools Recommendation Scheme will still be there. So that's pretty much where we're at. We are hoping to start making offers from the 5th of August. So we brought that forward a little bit. And we're also looking at ways we can engage students once the HSC is finished. So watch this space on that one, but we are exploring ways that we might be able to engage students, those prospective students, in facilitating their arrival at campus and dealing with the disruption. Hopefully that will take place from early December, but we're finalising that at the moment, but we're hoping in early August, around time that we make the first offers, we'll be alerting students to that possibility, whether they might like to participate in that scheme or not. You heard it here first.
So that sort of answers, I think, hopefully Linda answers your question. You know, all the details of that will come out very fairly soon. And I'll just field one of the question that came from Jude earlier around the issue of scholarships for asylum seekers and refugees, and we actually made more this year. There have been more scholarships given to those, or fee sponsorships, I guess technically, to those students than ever before. 5 students in session 1, and there is actually a paper going to a Peak University committee this next week to further that and just refine it a little bit. But I think we're still intending for that to go on in the future, so that cohort will be supported going on. I think we better move on to Jonathan now. Jonathan Wahi is the Community Projects Coordinator for the City of Ryde. So we invited Jonathan because I guess we've been working quite a bit with the City of Ryde, and obviously Macquarie's environment and a local community is something that's very important to us. So welcome, Jonathan, and I think you're going to talk about the impact in the local community around Macquarie's campus.
That's right. Thank you, Stuart. And thank you for the Macquarie University inviting council to come along and speak to the HEPPP Community Forum. I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm sitting in my apartment on Darug land and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and that Ryde Council itself, our offices there on Wallamondigal land. I'd like to really thank Roberta and yourselves for the really good extensive overview of the impacts of COVID on the education, higher education and the community. And it's been a great learning experience for me to take that in, and I'm looking forward to sharing actually this, the recording of this with my colleagues and also in the community sector. There's a few points that were raised there just before I really get into what I want to talk about. And I think it was that what Roberta was talking about, how the socioeconomic fragility was exposed. And I think that's something that council has been looking at for a few years now. And we were sort of looking at what would unlock this, you know, and how would this be exposed, because it would only take something, you know, some disaster or downturn in the economy to actually expose it. And I think that's what we're dealing with now in all its different forms. But today, what I'd really like to talk about is just more of a narrow cast of what we're doing from a local government perspective and how we're responding to the COVID lockdown and the impacts. So when it started to happen, the first thing that council did was with the lockdown, we had to lock down our community facilities and libraries, Ryde Aquatic Leisure Centre, and a lot of meeting places. And we knew that this would have an impact on the community straight away. And because council provides so many meeting places for community groups and community to, you know, get together, do social things, but also to provide training, workshops, social interactions, community organisations doing their programs. So there's been a real loss in the community of that infrastructure in the short term. We will be opening probably community facilities later in mid to late July. Yeah. So just getting back to the narrowcast thing. So what we looked at as a team, I'm in the community development team and I'm a social inclusion worker. Thanks for that. We looked at a few key areas, and one was financial hardship, food insecurity, and we were looking at resilience. And we realised straight away that overseas students would be unable to access job seeker and job keeper payments. That became very clear with the government announcement of, you know, who was eligible and who wasn't. And so we started to formulate a response to that. And we also anticipated very early in the piece, we realised there was going to be an increase in the reporting of racism incidents. I don't know if you know, that was as early as February and March, or that Eastwood was designated by the Daily Telegraph as ground zero for COVID. So it was, let's point at the Asians in Eastwood, but let's not talk about, you know, pensioners coming off cruise ships. So it was identified very early, and there was an increase in racism being reported across the board as well. And so we had to come up with a response to that. And also we anticipated that there would be an increase in domestic violence, and there was increased reporting of domestic violence as well. So actually during the lockdown period, from the information provided by frontline service providers who are providing support for survivors of domestic violence, that there's been a 30% increase in demand on services across the board. So that's whether it's using refuges or whether it's looking for people who are trying to sorry, I'm just digressing here. So yeah, so there was a big increase in reports of domestic violence and its impacts on children and on families, on carers as well. So really, we had to come up with some responses. So really, I'm just going to talk about those responses. So if we just go to the next slide. Thanks. So as Sean alluded to before, Harris Farm has been a great player in providing support in terms of food security with providing food, fruit and vegetable produce. They contacted us very early in the piece and saying that they were willing to give away their produce. How can we go about doing it and what will be a structured way to do it? So we did it in partnership with Lane Cove. The first organisations, we had to come up with a list of organisations to contact. So the first people that we contacted were Macquarie University and the Wellbeing Unit straight off the bat, because we knew the impacts were going to be the most pronounced and severe. And then when I rang up the Wellbeing Unit and was talking to some, I think, intake workers, they said straight away the impacts that were on the overseas international students were quite profound, and the level of support. So we found out who they were working with in terms of addressing this from the university. The Wellbeing Unit pointed us towards Red Frog, so we got them involved, and they've been quite active in our partnership working with them and Harris Farm. I guess with that, Red Frog comes along with their volunteers. They provide the bags that we actually bag the produce with, and then along with the Community Migrant Resource Centre, North Ryde Community Aid, Relationships Australia, and Gladesville, Christchurch, Gladesville, and Resolution Community Services. We get together and sort of put produce into 100 bags, and then those participating organisations such as Red Frog and the ones I've mentioned, they take them and distribute them to their clients. This has been going on for about 6 weeks now, and so that's about 3,000 bags that we've given out, and that's just a small percentage. Red Frog does a lot more, as Sean was saying earlier, but at least this is the part of what we're doing, and we're sort of trying to spread that around in the community. So in the community for us, we know it's going to international students, it's going to people in social housing, it's socially isolated people, it's going to people who are experiencing domestic violence, and it's going to people in certain visa classes who, like bridging visas, for example, who are unable to access sort of government support. So that's one of our responses that we've provided. What we also do is when we're doing those bags of food, we provide referral information to emergency relief providers. So we put information in those bags so it's targeted, so when people get their bags of food, they can find out where they can get other types of support as well. Just while I'm just talking about financial hardship, it sort of brings up the issue of resilience as well. And I think this was mentioned before by Roberta. It is really interesting to look at how we can, how do we work with people and in terms of developing resilience. if it needs to be developed. And so one of the projects that we're doing right now is we're training community people and some students from Macquarie University as well to do a number of podcasts and go out and interview people in the community and tell, so they can actually get at a ground level information from people. How are they dealing with this? What are their issues and how do they deal with it? And one of the things that we're doing in this podcast training, which is a partnership with the Community Migrant Resource Centre, is we're interviewing people who are asylum seekers and refugees and asylum seekers to speak about resilience, because it's a great opportunity to take a strength-based approach with the refugees and asylum seekers in our communities and get them to share, well, this is what you do when you can't go out to eat because people are shooting at you. This is what you do when you can't access that. This is what you do when you when there's no water or there's no electricity. This is what you do when you're isolated. And we thought it was a really powerful opportunity for people to hear these stories. And because what we realized is that with resilience, it's one of the best ways of sort of understanding resilience is just sharing stories, hearing what people do and how they survive. And I do agree with what Roberta was saying earlier. People are they are resilient. And I think one of the best ways of showing that it will be okay and you will get through this is to hear people talk who've just gone through quite, horrific things, and they're still here, they're positive, and they're making a go of it, and they've got another type of worldview to understand sort of situations that we're facing now. Okay, I might just move on to the next slide about racism. Thank you. Okay, so with the increase in the incidence of reporting racism that Council received, what we've done is that we've included information, practical information about what to do if you experience racism directly or if you are a bystander, and that's sort of practical anti-racism strategies. On our website, we've also put that similar information up as well, so people can sort of start to download sort of how-to guides, how to deal with racism, etc. Something else that we're doing that's quite exciting is we're doing a research partnership with the Macquarie University, and this has been going for about 2 years. We've funded the university to do a report on the international students' experience of racism. And the research was carried out last year. It's sort of been completed. It's going to print as we speak. Well, it's going through the design phase anyway. And that's really highlighted the experience of racism by international students. And there's a breakdown of where they experience racism, the gender breakdown as well, the types of racism. So basically, if you're in the university or public transport or you're in a shopping centre, you're more likely to experience racism. And this has increased during the lockdown period as well. Part of that report, we'll be publishing an article about that in Mosaic, which is the journal from the Federation of Ethnic Community Councils of Australia. So that's one thing that we're doing. And also we're currently, the second phase from that research report is that we're actually working with the university to develop sort of resources around combating racism. I think we're up to about 8 languages at the moment, and it's the design of strategies for where's the best place to deliver that for the university and also in the community as well. And we want to make it age appropriate too, and also culturally appropriate. So that's what's been happening in that space. And just to go back just even a couple more years, the City of Ryde's been doing a partnership with the Macquarie University because both organisations, Racism It Stops With Me sort of campaign partners, which is from the Australian Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission. And so we've funded Salvation Army, and in partnership with Macquarie University, we did a film called Unified Ride, which was an exploration of sort of racism, its impacts on people. So we've also, a couple of years ago, we sort of promoted that video, and also strategies in combating racism with students at, I think there was a TEDx event that was at Macquarie University a few years ago. So we've sort of got this really good partnership going with the university as well, because we recognise that the international students are a large part of our community, and that the, you know, as you may know, that in Ryde itself, half the population doesn't speak English at home. So we're really trying to get that focus on an inclusive sort of community as well. I might just move to the next one now. It's about domestic violence. Great. So as I said before, from our frontline organisations supporting people with domestic violence, we've said there's been a 30% increase in demand for services. So one of our responses to this has been that we did a partnership with the DV and family violence sort of interagency or network, and we've run a series of visits to Burwood Domestic Violence Court, or Court, because they're the main feeder organisation, feeder court about domestic violence. And so we take community people along to that. We take women along for that from different language groups. We arrange for interpreters, and the idea for that is that those women and then go back into the community. They've met people within the domestic violence sort of court legal process, policing process, and support services, and then they can go back and sort of share that information with people in their community, their members and their families. That's been really successful. We've conducted it for Mandarin speakers, Cantonese, Koreans speakers, Arabic speakers, Farsi speakers, Dari speakers, and also in English, and we've done that for community organisations. We're currently doing a thing now with a program called Multilingual Ambassadors Program, and which we had our first meeting last night actually. We've got 45 participants in that, and we've got a good cohort from the university as well. And this type of training that we're doing around domestic violence is part of the training that they'll be receiving, which is good, because the idea being that they can also go back into sort of their community and the community of the university as well. The other things that have been happening in the domestic violence space are that the DV support services, a lot of the things that they had to do in terms of face-to-face counselling then moved online, and the sort of the sector's been sort of very active in that space, providing those type of offline meetings as well, online meetings, I should say. There's a whole lot of information that I've sort of attached that really to the presentation and regarding this, but rather than reading it out, I mean, this is for your own information. I guess I'm in those sort of three key areas. That's where our focus is at the moment. I'm more than happy to provide any more information about that, because it's evolving all the time. So we're updating that information all the time. So I'm more than happy to sort of provide that information as it changes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, just to follow on a bit, Jonathan, you mentioned about the asylum seekers and refugees, and I just wondered if there was any resources around that in terms of that project you were discussing, talking about.
Well, absolutely. Now, I met with them yesterday. We were just sort of updating all that, and we're doing the recording schedule was a varied feast, but it's coming up next week. So I'll definitely, Stuart, I'll send that through to everyone.
That'd be perfect. That'd be very perfect.
So, if there's any questions?
There are a few comments. So Linda mentioned about that there's a Unified Ride project that was run a few years ago. I don't know if you've got any knowledge of that at all, or that was around students from there working with it.
Oh, fantastic. So, yes, so we were involved in sort of supporting that project. It was a really good project with Macquarie University. It had an extensive involvement of PACE students as well, who were looking at it from, I think we had a cohort of 18 or 20 students from different faculties working on it. So we looked at it from the psychology, marketing, there's students from everywhere. So yeah, it was a great project, joint project. I think that was, yeah.
Perfect. I've got a question from Sire regarding any support that the City of Ryde is able to provide to Macquarie students who might be from a refugee and asylum seeker backgrounds. I'm wondering what support is provided to be provided from the city.
Yeah, okay. So what council doesn't provide direct sort of support. Usually we just provide information and referral, but we would connect you to agencies, for example, like Red Cross or Settlement Services International, Resolution Community Services, Community Migrant Resource Centre. So it's more of that. But we like to do, in council, we like to do warm referrals as well, which is, that's just jargon for, rather than giving you a phone number, we'll ring up and we'll let the service know who is going to contact them. So it's not that sort of awkward, sort of clunky type of thing when you just hand out a phone number and people have to ring up. So we prefer to do it that way whenever it's possible. Yeah. So that's sort of the things that we do. I mean, also with asylum seekers and refugees, we provide training. Next week, we're actually providing training for community organisations so they can provide better targeted support and have a better understanding of the issues facing refugees and asylum seekers as well. That's part of our Refugee Week sort of activities.
Okay, and finally, there was some comment from Swan, but it's more of a support, some more other materials really in that way in regard to relationship violence and risks and response resources. So maybe we can share back with you some of the things we can do as well.
Oh, that'd be great, yeah.
And one last one coming in from Kylie, but just to say, just wondering if the council has a strategy around international students getting some casual employment, anything that we could, collaboration or anything the council is doing in relation to that, because it's obviously a stressful area for international students not being able to work to support themselves.
Yeah, I'd really like to sort of take forward a discussion of that with my with Council's Economic Development Coordinator, Jan Bahali. In the past, we've done things where we've done sort of speed dating with, TAFE students with local employers. So I'd be more than happy to sort of look at something like that, something that's fairly immediate that we could try and put together, definitely. I mean, just letting you know, within council, we realise that this is going to be an ongoing issue. I mean, basically, we're sort of in our planning, we're looking at that. I mean, this is just from the community services side of things, that this is going to be ongoing, that vulnerability that has been exposed, that Roberta so well described, is going to be here for a long time. I think it is an opportunity that now it's a bit more front of mind. I think sometimes in areas like Ryde, people don't see it as front of mind, but we definitely are working with people who are vulnerable. And at a planning level, we expect that this is going to go on for quite some time as well. We're sort of doing the recession planning. And because I'm old enough to have worked through recessions, it's in community services, it's, these are ongoing long-term systemic problems. So hopefully we have, we're able to develop a response and partnerships with organisations, community organisations, and also the university, so we can support it, because it's been really good for us to hear the impacts on students. We sort of had a rough idea, but it's good to see what's being done, and we're very keen to sort of see how we can work with the university too to support students as well.
That's a perfect segue to our last question from Nick, who says, well, what more help can the university provide to your unit? So we've been asking about what you provide, but we're also saying, well, what can we work on with you and what can we provide for you?
Yeah.
What areas are you looking at?
Yeah, great question from Nick, and thanks, Nick, for that. So we would like to, I guess for us, what we would like to do, the things that we're doing around domestic violence and anti-racism and the sort of that food security support, how we can sort of promote that more within the university, and get the message out there what services are available. That will be really good for us, yeah. If we could sort of develop those pathways for information and referral, that would be excellent, Stuart.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jonathan. We'll try and keep a conduit between you and ourselves. Carolina's been doing a lot of that. So,
Terrific. Thank you.
our final presenter, just before I introduce our final presenter, just to say that at the end there will be a survey as you're leaving the meeting. So obviously we don't hope you're not leaving now, but when you do, there will be a survey. So it'd be really helpful if you can complete that as you go, just to say how you found the session. Finally, we have Ben Wilkes, who's the Associate Director of Student Wellbeing at the university. And he's obviously going to be talking about how this issue has impacted on probably students' well-being and what's been done to assist them. So, Ben.
Thank you, Stuart. Just move along to the next slide, sorry. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak today. Obviously, COVID's impact on wellbeing has been far-reaching, and that doesn't exclude students, as we've already heard today. I guess in the initial sort of phase of sort of what happened is the biggest fear that sort of came out initially was regarding the actual illness. And then it's sort of moved into this period of focused on what's going to happen to the future post the illness. But also during all this time, there's been fear for the well-being of others and feeling powerless. And this is particularly impacting students who are living away from families. And they've got families who might be older or more vulnerable, and not being able to sort of interrupt the power of COVID on their families and potentially the life devastating impacts on their sort of health and condition. And I guess the biggest response to sort of social distancing was the fact that we had to avoid a lot of stuff, and avoidance in terms of a psychological sort of response to events usually isn't too kind going forward, because it promotes a reluctance in terms of engagement with the same activities going forward. As they say, when someone falls off a bike, the safest thing is to jump back on straight away. But for many of our students, but also the community, it's going to take a lot of time to get them back into sort of the outside world and interacting with their normal lives. And I know there's been stories in the last 24 hours, even in New Zealand, about those that are and those that aren't going out into the real world when the restrictions have been lifted there. Next slide, please. In terms of impact on students, the biggest initial impact that sort of affected their well-being was their connection to others, places and activities. Like any of us, humans love a routine, and what we had to do, as Sean said earlier, is we had to press hold on actual courses for 2 weeks at the start of the year, and that allowed us time to prepare the learning materials, but it also allowed everyone a time to recalibrate. But during that pausing the sort of the routines for everyone in terms of their university studies, there was a period of definite isolation from the connections they would normally have or were expecting to have for some of our new students to the campus. And we sort of broke that down. And when we sort of got back into the routine of classes, there was a lot of new means of learning. And for people who are familiar with the digital world, it's been a better adjustment for them than those without. And particularly for students with disabilities, it's been navigating university systems, but also the technologies they've had to learn during the process as well, in terms of enabling them to use the assistive technologies the universities put in place. One of the more practical things is that the avenues for support for students and any member of the community totally changed. Even going to the GP or accessing psychological support, the move predominantly was to non-face-to-face means of accessing support, and whether that's through chat, whether that's through phone or some other digital interface, there's been a lot of other sorts of avenues of support for people. Next slide, please. And if we get into the real terms, and I think we've heard a bit about it already, the biggest initial impact that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 months is the loss of cash flow. And that relates to people's money that normally have for their own jobs, but also those for the generations of their family that may be supplying money to them as well, but also any sort of funding from other countries as well for international students could be a really big thing in terms of how to get money to this country. And when you have no rent money or no money for basic food items such as food, it's quite debilitating on the mind, but also on the body in terms of how to respond in those certain conditions. Another big thing for a lot of students in lower socioeconomic backgrounds is the idea that they have dual responsibilities, and they may be relate to being a parent as well and having their kids at home. And that was an interfering sort of force in terms of their ability to engage with studies and having to accommodate that in terms of the timelines of when they were submitting their work. And the last one is, the biggest one is it's for all of us as well, is just an uncertainty from week to week about what's the world going to look like and who am I going to be able to engage with. And that is a very daunting thing for individuals from week to week. Next slide, please. Might have to load up the entire slide here because it comes up in different pieces. So to give you a sort of a background in terms of where the university has sort of supported students and where it's come from, the university launched the Student Success Strategic Framework about 12 months ago. And in that framework, we articulate that the student is part of many different dynamics on campus, and that's from the learning environment to where they live, how they got to the university, but how they do things afterwards. And when we've sort of thought of the responses during this COVID sort of pandemic, we've actually tried to sort of tick off each of the boxes on this diagram in terms of making sure that there is still a way for students to engage with all the aspects of what it is to be involved with the university experience without being involved with the campus environment. So that's the one thing we've taken away from students during this period, but with as much as possible we've tried to ensure that there is a sort of a flow of activities and engagement that allows them to sort of collaborate and be with each other and enabled and I guess focused on the idea that they'll be going forward through this crisis. A very simple thing that was very beneficial, I think, in terms of the engagement of students and reduce their fear levels was we had a no-fail sort of results for students this semester. And psychologically, for people adjusting to a period of change in terms of the academic learning environment, this is a very, I guess, it's an excellent idea from the executive and those in learning and teaching to put forward that there will be a special grade for those that don't pass their units, but there'll be no academic penalty that will restrict their entry into future programs going forward. You know, psychological mindset that you could say that it's a free swing for students, but it also means that it opens them up to the opportunities to sort of engage with the units without the fear of failing course of the actual learning environment. If we go to the next slide, please. Earlier on, Roberta emphasised the importance of careers in terms of how that was going to have a huge impact on what people were going to be able to do throughout this crisis and afterwards. So during the pandemic, we've launched a few programs using digital technologies, and one of those is a career zone for students. And we've also launched a couple of external partnerships with digital providers, and one of those was being ReadyGrad, to sort of review the sort of skills and sort of enable students to sort of get their CVs out in the world and to make sure they're sort of engaged with the external world or ready for those job opportunities that are now starting to come back online as we come out of the social distancing phase of the pandemic. Sorry. Next slide, please. And with the careers and employment, we've also changed how we sort of supply information to students. So we've provided professional zones to help the skills development of students, but also we have started the Macquarie Student Employment Talent Pool. And this is a pool of students for the university that we actually started before the pandemic, but it's actually more and more important now, where students have lost employment in hospitality and all sorts of industry outside the university, that we really want to tap into the talent pool of the student body and to make sure that they've got opportunity to learn, to earn money and also have that cash flow that I mentioned earlier. So this is something that we've sort of developed, well, leading into developing prior to the pandemic rising, but it's been very timely in terms of being able to get students into jobs straight away during this time. And the next slide. One of the biggest things that we sort of learned early on, and Zoom's a very good example for us today in ensuring that lots of people are connected, but we really needed to be able to connect with students and make students feel connected to others. So we tried to transition how information got to students in terms of what we would do, and we created a newsletter in terms of how to get information to students, but also we reinvested in what might have been considered an old school technology, but it was blogs and posts from students. So we got bloggers, student bloggers with the MQ Stu, and this is where students get to feel what other students are experiencing at the time and bond with them in terms of what's happening for them and their adjustments to the learning processes, but also how those students are engaging with activities on campus. So these are paid positions where bloggers go through and tell other students how things are going through, and students can really connect to how to overcome challenges. And this is really important in terms of how do you build resilience? You become aware of how other people are overcoming challenges as well, and normalizing the aspects of sort of the engagement with others. Next slide, please. One of the more fortunate things that we had prior to the COVID-19 was we set up a partnership to launch the MQ Wellbeing app. So this year we launched the app in February, and as we know, March was the big month for the pandemic. And the app has been a huge success in terms of engagement, but also in terms of providing digital supports for students and also staff related to their wellbeing. At this stage, we have approximately 6,000 users of the app, and the app has many different resources, lodging from how to access support, but also tools and exercises related to mindfulness and well-being, but also how to get posts about what is happening in the virtual world in terms of the well-being space. For perspective, since we've launched in February, we've had over 250,000 users of the app or views within the app. And to compare that with the web pages is quite incredible. On top of that, we know that when people are using the app, they're engaged with the app for up to 3 minutes at a time, whereas our website in previous years would be 10 seconds per page. So we just know that the engagement when people are engaging with the app is much higher in that space, and that might be because they're traveling and using their phone. And we know that students in particular like to use the app on their phone, with only a very small proportion using digital devices such as iPads or notepads and things like that. The majority of people are using the app through their phone. Another system and process improvement that we sort of was in train before the pandemic was improving our systems with reporting. And Swan earlier mentioned some resources that sort of link through to this sort of avenue of student care and reporting. So this allows people to make digital reports about others in terms of providing referrals in terms of students that might need support. Even in this, particularly in this virtual world, it's very hard to get those in-person referrals between from students, from members of the community, or even from academic staff. And having a reporting mechanism like this in a centralized way allows us to sort of people to reach out for each other. And it's a virtual extension of the Are You OK? If you've asked someone, are you okay, and got a response that sort of indicated that you need support, this system has allowed us to sort of get those referrals from the members of the community, and that launched like a couple of weeks ago, and it's already had a big take up in the last week or so. Next slide, please. A really big thing to sort of be aware of is that throughout the pandemic, we've been seeking feedback. We've had a huge calling campaign. I think upwards of 8,000 students have been called on the phone by members of the Macquarie staff, and these are staff that may not have been able to continue with their normal roles at the start of the social distancing, but we really wanted to communicate with students and engage with them. So we've had calling campaigns, we've launched surveys of students in terms of the Pulse survey, in terms of checking on what's going on for them, making sure that they are engaging with not just the environment, but also their studies. And through those Pulse surveys, we've been able to identify students' needs and also been able to improve the services we've been delivering to students. One of the early things that we sort of recognised is that the university had a lot of online sort of supports for students, but you couldn't find it all in one place. So the Ozone, which is highlighted here, was where all those online supports are for students in one place, so they can just go to one page and find the information in one click. And sometimes that's the simplest thing that we can do, is put things in the right place at the right time. And sometimes it's like when you're at the supermarket, we do pick up the chocolates at the checkout. But that's where we've got to put the information sometimes about wellbeing aspects of things, but support aspects of things. It's where people are using the systems to have the information in front of them at the time. Next slide, please. In terms of COVID-specific initiatives, we've had a couple of these spoken about, the red frogs and the food deliveries. The job rescue package, which Kylie highlighted earlier through the chat, this is where we're meeting with students individually, reviewing their needs, and also getting them the tools to sort of getting back into the workforce. A lot of students might have had jobs for a long time, and this is where we're revamping their CVs, but also the skill sets they might be able to work on in order to re-engage with the community in a sort of a workforce capacity. Next slide. Sean talked to this earlier. In terms of the Student Success Support Package, the university has done a lot in terms of finances. In terms of scope, we've gone past approximately 15% of the university population has applied for support. So that's well over 6,000 applications in terms of support. Each week, the applications are sort of coming in. For give an example, we were dipping in terms of applications, but over the past week, we've had over 650 applications for support. And this is from students who need access to cash flow. And that might be for emergency sort of funding of items such as food or their housing. But also, I think there was a question earlier in the day from Carolyn in regards to how to access internet or digital devices. One of the grants that we have under this program is up to $2,000 to support students to either purchase an item, a piece of IT, but also to enable them to access internet from their region as well. So there's been a lot of support going out to students. I can't stress the need amongst students, local, domestic or otherwise. We've got students who, before they made contact with us, hadn't eaten for 3 or 4 days at a time. And it wasn't just them, it was their entire household of housemates as well, who were all at Macquarie. So throughout the program, it's been admirable work from everyone at Macquarie, but also all those external organisations trying to ensure that people are getting access to those basic human needs of housing and food and shelter. So thanks to everyone there, and we'll continue to do this going forward. The semester's almost over, but we'll continue this going forward, and the VC is being very adamant about that. To support our students going through to the end of the year. Next slide. Looking ahead, in terms of what are the basics that we need to sort of ramp up for, we need to work on the idea of an online orientation for our new students in the second session. There may be a lot more domestic students wishing to study due to the employment situation. So we've got lots of newly commencing students, and we've got teams working on online orientation. We're moving towards having our virtual careers fair and virtual events in general in terms of engaging with students. The careers fair in particular will allow employers to interact with students and show what offerings they have in terms of internships and positions next year. As mentioned earlier, we anticipate ongoing needs in terms of the SSSP, in terms of the success package for students. Student employment programs that we have commenced during COVID are going to be expanded throughout the second semester as we get back to campus, and lots more opportunities there to engage with students. What we also need to do going forward will be focusing on student retention, but also completion of what they're doing. So all the students that have been reaching out for support financially, we're going to track what their grades have been like in this initial semester, and making sure that they have access to the appropriate learning, teaching, and even social, psychological supports into the second semester to make sure that they're accessing success in terms of their education as well. I just wanted to finish today with a model of how to respond to people if you're sort of engaging with someone you might be concerned about. Like, are you okay is a very admirable sort of thing to sort of say to someone. And just the process of that is you really being present with someone, allowing them to talk and you listening to them. You allow to reflect on what's happening for them. You develop a plan of what's going to happen in terms of action. And then we get to the stage of reviewing what's happening to them. So in simple terms, we create a space for care. We allow someone to share their story. We make them aware of all the supports we've got. We dare them to sort of take up one of those supports. The last thing is probably the most important thing, is to compare what's happened or to review where they're at in terms once they've tried that support. In terms of local culture, we're very good at signposting. We're not very good at following up. So I impress to everyone, if you have sort of noticed someone in need, please follow up with them and whether they access that need and whether things have improved for them. That's my last message for today. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Ben. I've got a few questions for you actually. I'll jump in with my one first because I get the chance. So it looks like this has been an area where there's been a necessity to change what you're doing. So it's been led to a lot of inventive solutions and maybe more change than you would have seen otherwise in terms of BAU. So I just wonder what sort of support though you think students have missed in terms of what normal supports that they think they've missed. What things you provided a lot of new services. I just wonder what things they're looking forward to actually being able to access all.
I guess as a psychologist, one of the biggest things is face-to-face intervention. So in terms of people with the most severe needs, they've been able to access face-to-face interventions through hospital or mental health services, but in the community or through university providers, we've done a lot of our interventions through phone or virtual sort of spaces. So when students and the social restrictions are sort of relieved, students will get to do their face-to-face contact and sort of work on their needs in a more intimate sort of way in terms of those connections, but also allow them to further sort of explore their needs. Some people are more open over the phone, but a lot of people are more open in person when they've seen the face of the other person.
I've got a comment really from Carl on Mission Australia saying that they've actually got some opportunities for digital access training in Sydney, and they may be seen as a possible kitchen cooking employment opportunities. So maybe just something to follow up from there in terms of getting in touch with those, some opportunities there. A question from Anina about the financial support for students and whether that was a gift or a loan. Do they have to pay it back? Or?
Yeah, so we had a variety of sort of supports for students. The first option that we provided was a fee delay, because anyone who's paid their fees up front, we offered to give them up to 25% of those fees back, and so they had that on a payment plan so they didn't have to pay those fees for a 6-month period, because we knew the impact of this sort of situation was going to be for at least a 6-month period and that was our way to get cash flow out to students as quickly as we could. Then we've had emergency support options, and we've been providing food vouchers for students in lots of up to $250 in food vouchers. That's that assessment. And then following up on that, we've got the grant option up to $2,000 for students. And for students who may have cash flow coming in, or they might be on things, their Centrelink payments might have been doubled, so they know they're going to have income coming in, we would be providing those loans to pay off so they can access that digital sort of equipment, and then they can repay those loans through their Centrelink monies, which have been doubled through this period.
Fantastic. We've also got a question from Joanne Jamie about what strategies you used to call students, were there particular cohorts you looked at, and whether the calling is really to find out what support students needed, or whether it was actually provide information to their students.
So I think that the plan initially was to call every first-year student. That was the starting point. And every person who commenced this year was called and spoken to. And then we went into targeted groups based on their level of need, in terms of, we've called international students based on, we knew their adjustment or their financial needs might be there. And through the conversation, it wasn't purely a wellbeing conversation, it was a support conversation about all the types of supports related to learning and teaching, how to access the library, how to access units, how to just log into units for lots of students for the first time. And through that sort of calling, we got a lot of information from students that we sort of responded to, but we also were able to sort of provide initial referrals to sort of supports available to them. Sorry, Stuart.
A comment from Nick to say that the corporate engagement team are really happy to help you, so we'll
Okay.
maybe again somebody to look in. And just Anina was just a bit confused. I think that the grants that we're talking about, there's two bits. That there's one is grants that actually providing. It's not just a loan, is it? Some of the grants that we're providing.
No, so we provided a delay of fees, so that's effectively a loan of the student's own money for a lot of students. But we've provided actual grants to people as well in terms of $2,000, but also vouchers as well. So food vouchers have been something that we needed to get out straight away to people to make sure they're fed. And that doesn't rely on having the student's bank account details, so we can give them a voucher and they can go spend it straight away. So that's a way of providing emergency support straight away to them.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Ben. So just thank you for all our speakers. It's been really good. And thank you, so many of you have joined us here. Really appreciate that. I think next forum we're planning for is for October. And we are hoping that we can actually have a lunch and learn at that point. Although obviously from this experience, we might make sure that we do both an on-campus and online experience, so those who are not able to join can participate as well. We will have some speakers. We've certainly got some speakers planned from Mission Australia, but we really appreciate any suggestions for people out there, whether it's for people themselves to speak, or whether they've got any suggestions of people that might be useful to invite. So please let us know if you've got any thoughts on areas that we might want to look at as part of that. And as I said earlier, please make sure you just do the survey as you go. It should be really helpful for us to know how it's gone. So I think without that, I think that's the end of the forum. And thank you very much for joining us.